Alrighty, everybody. Welcome to the Station Square podcast. This is Robert Jackson here, and today we're going to be chatting with somebody who is a very, very special guest. They've been in the business for a very long time. You might have seen their name on Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon. Pretty much, it's the man that have created, who's pretty much shaped the foundations of a lot of our childhoods. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking to the one and only Fred Seibert. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for the great introduction.
Yeah, no problemo. What I'd like to do before we actually get to the meat, to the nitty-gritty of things is share about yourself, how has life been treating you, and all that good jazz. What have you been up to since the pandemic? And yeah, just floor is
Okay.
yours.
Everything's going great. The pandemic caused me to move from the East Coast back to the West Coast for the third time. I'm in a place where both my sons live and I work. And my sons are more important than my work. So that makes me really happy.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, always got to be there for your family, man. It's really important that, with the pandemic, we've been spending more time with our loved ones, friends, and yeah, it's just really important to keep yourself, busy and productive in the midst
Absolutely.
of everything that's been going on.
Absolutely. Mm, I'm
Yeah.
a happy guy. I do great work or work that I like. Let's put it that way. And you can't be living on the West Coast where the weather is nice most of the time. And because of the pandemic, I still want to eat outside all the time. So I get to eat outside all the time year round.
There you go. Yeah, that's pretty much is the case with me too. Yeah, it's nice to go out and get some fresh air every now and then. Um,
Fantastic.
yeah, glad that you're doing well. I've got questions for you today. Um,
Hit me, babe.
what I usually ask is, how did you get started with blah, 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 blah? But instead, I would like to ask you, what actually got you interested with everything that it is that you're doing? Like, what actually was like the first taste of you entering showbiz? What is your story?
Well, I guess the it depends how far back you go. When I was in elementary school, I played the accordion and I loved performing for people with my accordion. And then when I was 12 years old, the Beatles came to America and I found out that I could have a band. So I got together a couple of friends and I had bands from the time I was in junior high school up through college. And that was great. Then in college, I decided not to be a science major like I had planned and hung out at the college radio station so much that I never graduated from college. But I got to record great musicians, start a little record company with friends of mine, and the rest just sort of flowed from all that.
Nice. So when you were performing and you were doing all of this stuff, did it ever occur to you that hey, this should probably be like a career. Like maybe I should start doing this for a living. Did that ever cross your mind?
It did once. My partners and I started our record company when I was 19. And, I'd grown up in a family business. My parents are both pharmacists. And I worked at my parents' pharmacy from the time I was 5 until I was 25 when they sold their business. And so I was used to being in business. And when you start a record company, you want to sell enough records that you can make the next record. So that meant that we had to do business. And whether I had planned on it or not, all of a sudden I was in show business.
Yeah. Because I was doing a bit of research before we actually started the call, and you started in college radio. So how did that, sort of fall? How did, you know, that come to be, pretty much?
Well, that was just sort of one of those things. I had bumped into a friend of mine that I didn't like, that I went to high school with on a college break, probably on Thanksgiving break or something. And he was bragging to me that he worked at his college radio station. And because he worked at the college radio station, he got a lot of free records. And, in my day, getting free music was like gold on the streets. And I had probably 10 or 12 albums of my own, a bunch of 45s. But the idea that I could get free records was, one, really attractive. And two, I really was annoyed that this guy I didn't like was doing better than me at getting free music. So, literally, when I got home from Thanksgiving break, I walked up to the college radio station, knocked on the door. I started working there right away.
Yeah, so with your experience with radio and whatnot, that really did help you. Because pretty much with that, with your experience being in radio and then jumping into television, the skills that you've accumulated over the years, that's how it definitely followed you right when you were starting your career into television, so to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I lucked out because I had a boss in radio where we would make television commercials for our radio station. And he had a very backwards view of how you make television. So, generally, what happens when you're making a film or a television, you film it, then you put together the pieces that you want in an edit, and then you make the soundtrack work. My boss said, we're going to start with the soundtrack, make a great soundtrack, and then put the pictures on top of that. And that was perfect for me because I had all these audio skills. And so I could be sort of the center of the making of these TV commercials, which really got me ready to go into the television business without my knowing it.
Yeah. And you were also very instrumental on because you were pretty much you developed the original voice and the identity for MTV, Comedy Central, Nick at Night, and Nickelodeon. So that was like a pretty exciting time for when it comes to pretty much the Viacom and pretty much that whole like time period was you pretty much was developing a new you pretty much paved the way for like new exciting programming because like particularly with MTV that came during the time where like television was kind of sort of this it was a it was an area where you see this family friendly wholesome programming but for MTV it's more for okay for people like me back in the day this is for more for like people teenagers young adults like this is more where it's you're catering towards the more mature audiences and at the time it was technically unheard of so what you and your team did back in the day was considered to be groundbreaking and like I said it jump started a lot of careers and it a lot of people just really owe you for really kickstarting a new renaissance age of television, at least to
Well,
me.
I was a really lucky guy in
Yeah.
that my personality was such that I was a really bad employee. And so I wasn't going to get a job at a place where I fit into a slot, where there were a bunch of people working and they needed somebody to fill the slot and they'd hire them. I never got hired for those jobs. I always got in on things at the very beginning because they needed to hire people who were cheap and who had like sort of some basic skills, but that could learn things along the way. So, at a variety of times in my work life, I've gone in not knowing how to do too much, but just enough to get myself in trouble and be there at the beginning. So, now we call them startups. I've been involved in a lot of startups, which fits my personality really well.
Right. Yeah, because with pretty much how you you pretty much build this entire because you were because back in the day because like you wanted to develop it in you want to do the same because you were able to think of the networks that you were working for as brands because with MTV because we had back then because with music television it was pretty much like you watch music videos and there was no scheduling, so it's pretty much like there was more creative freedom that went behind with these networks. That was kind of the thing that really jumps, that was what also paved for like stuff that we ended up getting, like it was this kind of creative freedom that also led to, like with Nickelodeon, where they were developing the Nicktoons brand, and with Nick at Night, like I said, Comedy Central with their animated programs. So um it was a pretty historic time in the field of television and in animation in general.
Well, you got to realize that at the time when Nickelodeon and MTV started, the average home in America had two channels of television. And so wherever it was that you lived, you just watched whatever was there because you had no choice. But at the same time, a metropolitan area like New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, they all had 70 or 80 radio stations. And in order for those stations to succeed, they had to create personalities for themselves to differentiate themselves from the other people. So when MTV and Nickelodeon came along, they were two of 30 cable channels, which in television terms blew our minds. How can there be 30 television channels? But coming out of radio, like I did, like my boss did, like a lot of our colleagues did, we realized from the beginning that we had to create a personality. So we first did it with MTV. We created a personality. I used to say that my job was I needed to make the M famous. I didn't think about anything else other than making that M famous. And when we got to Nickelodeon a few years later, Nickelodeon was number 30 out of 30 television channels. And they didn't have any money for new programming. They didn't have any money for marketing. And we realized that if we were going to get kids to pay attention, because no kids really liked Nickelodeon at the time, that we needed to make Nickelodeon the star, not any of the TV shows, not any of the actors. We needed to make Nick itself the star. So pretty much in the same way we did for MTV, we created a story for Nickelodeon and really made kids fall in love with Nickelodeon, which led them to the great set of shows that they had so they could fall in love with the shows.
Right. Because as an animation fan and just a longtime researcher on all things that, from like specific, because I also do like, I've talked with people in the industry, I've talked to people who have worked on these shows, and it's like the more that I hear about them, the more it's like, because for me as a content creator and as somebody who is considered to be like because I do this other stuff, like I do VO writing and all of that stuff, so I'm pretty much am marketing myself as somebody who is sort of the jack of all trades, and it was because of these shows and with people like you, people like Linda Saminsky, and a lot of these other folks that have been working over at Cartoon Network, Hanna-Barbera, and whatnot, with these shows, because with a lot of these creators now, because of the shows that we grew up with in the 90s, 2000s, and onwards, we're kind of starting to become the next generation of
Sure,
creators. And that's pretty much,
absolutely.
yeah, what you've said upon, like building a new generation of creators, cartoonists, and people that have worked in the industry and shaping them up into a new generation of, future cartoonists out there that want to give this a shot and making their dreams come true, making it a reality.
Well, what you're really lucky to live in an era where you don't
Hmm.
need to go to work for a company that has billions of dollars in order to make your
Right.
stuff and find an audience for it. Now with an email address, you can sign up for a channel on YouTube, on Instagram, whichever platform you like. And all of a sudden, billions of people are out there waiting for you to show them what you got. And you don't need to talk to anybody about it. In my business, we had to go and convince people to give us millions and millions and millions of dollars to make the things that we did. And then on top of it, once they gave us the money, they tried to tell us what to do. You're in a position where you get to do what you think is right. And if the audience likes it, you can pat yourself on the back. And if the audience doesn't like it, you can't blame anybody else. You can look in the mirror and go, what did I do wrong? That's a great, great opportunity that you have that, honestly, in my day, we never had.
Right, because with the age of social media and like I said, the pandemic where people are just working from home remotely, it's led to a lot of bigger opportunities than like say if you were going to go into a studio and meet up with the execs, you pitch a show to them and fingers crossed 9 times out of 10 like part of the job is learning how to deal with the constant rejection in the industry because I know for every show that you see out there like on Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon there's like probably thousands of submissions that have
That's for
unfortunately have
sure.
not seen the light of day. Yeah,
Absolutely.
tough.
Even in our shop, we tend to look at 100 things before we find something we want to do.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because for every successful show, there's like one other show that didn't make the cut. Like there's I mean I won't talk about this is going to bring me to another topic in a little bit to a series of programs that I'll get to in a little bit but for now I do want to talk about the something that I know that a lot of people from like 80s and 90s will definitely remember. I want my MTV, which if you've lived in that era you that slogan is pretty much like it's pretty much famous at this point and there's not like a time where you haven't lived in that era and you have not heard that slogan. So, how did that slogan come to be? That's my question.
Okay, I'll tell you. So, in the late 1950s, there was a great animated filmmaker named John Hubley.
Oh,
And
yeah.
John Hubley got hired by a company that owned a product called Mapo. And he came up with a campaign called I Want My Mapo. And the star of it
I
was a little
remember that.
animated boy, right? A little boy
Yeah.
named Marky Mapo. And, the problem was that Mapo was a terrible tasting cereal. I know this because, like a lot of other children, I convinced my mother to buy Mapo. I tasted it once and we threw it away from there. But the commercial remained famous. Then in the late 1960s, an advertising executive called George Lois, a creative executive, revived Mapo by using big sports stars of the time to do a campaign in the New York City area. And he revived it by having the sports stars whining in the camera, I want my Mapo. And they would start to cry, et cetera, et cetera. Mapo was still a terrible cereal. The campaign went nowhere, but George remembered it. In the early 1980s, my mentor, a guy named Dale Pond, partnered with George Lois in a new ad agency. And I convinced my bosses that we should hire their agency to come up with a campaign for MTV because we had been with a famous advertising agency and they had done a terrible job because they didn't understand anything about music. They didn't understand anything about media, cable television media. So we hired Dale and George, and George came up with this idea of getting the rock stars to say, I want my MTV, and he wanted them to cry. And so we rejected the idea right away. And I went back to my office, and Dale, my mentor, called me up and he said, look, I think if you took away the crying, it's a really good idea. I said, okay, if you can get the crying out of there, we'll try and get Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones and Pete Townsend from the Who and whoever else we can get involved in the campaign. From that day on, George basically dropped out of the campaign. Dale produced the thing, and probably for the next 7 or 8 years, made variations on I Want My MTV. It not only became a famous slogan, but more importantly, it helped grow MTV from being in 2 million homes around America to eventually almost 100 million homes.
Wow, that is really amazing.
It was incredible.
Yeah. So with MTV, because you've been working at MTV for a long time and with Nickelodeon, so yeah, how did you, because with after years of working with those two, um, with your clients, so let's talk about Hanna-Barbera. So what led you to Hanna-Barbera as a
Well, look,
person?
it's fairly simple. I had a partner that we had started the first media branding agency in the world called Fred Allen. My partner was Alan Goodman. We were great buddies from college radio, and at the time, he started living with my sister. And over the time we built the company, it was the two of us. And by the time, 10 years later, we probably had 50 employees. And one day, Alan and my sister eloped. And Alan and I weren't getting along at the time. We get along great now. He's one of my best friends. But at the time, we weren't getting along. We were having problems with our clients. And I realized that I had to see him now every holiday anyway, because we were part of the same family. And so we sat down, we talked, and we said, look, we don't really like having this agency. It's made us a lot of money. We've been really lucky. We've had a good time, but we're having less and less of a good time all the time. And we both want to do other things. So we announced that we were closing the company. I had a house outside of New York City. I was getting divorced from my first wife. And I decided I was going to go out to my house, lick my wounds, and take a year to figure out what I was going to do next. And 24 hours later, the president of Ted Turner's company, Ted Turner's the guy who invented CNN, Cartoon Network, TBS,
Yeah.
TNT, blah, 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 a brilliant, genius, crazy man. The president of his company called me up and said, hey, I heard you close your company. And, we bought Hanna-Barbera cartoons. I said, yeah, I remember, best of luck. In fact, I'm wearing a Hanna-Barbera watch right now, I said to him. He said, well, it's really a disaster out there. They haven't had a hit in 12 years. The last time they had a hit was with the Smurfs in 1981. And I was thinking, why don't you come out and run it? And I paused for a second and I said, well, I don't know how to make cartoons. He said, well, you did all that stuff for Nickelodeon. I said, Alan and I took the logo of Nickelodeon and essentially we wiggled it for 10 seconds. That's my experience in animation. He said, look, it couldn't get any worse. They haven't had a hit. If you don't have a hit, no one will blame you. And if you do have a hit, everybody will think you're great. So I thought about it for a couple of minutes and realized, well, look, I don't really like Alan anymore. I don't like my clients anymore. There's nothing for me to do in New York. If I move to Los Angeles and start in cartoons, I can kind of start over. So I was 40 years old. I needed 3 months to shut down the company, help our clients, move on to the next steps. And 3 months later, in June of 1992, I moved to Los Angeles, walked into Hanna-Barbera for the first time, having passed by the studio for 20 years on my trips to Los Angeles. I walked in the first time as the president of the company, scared shitless. I had no idea what I was doing. And honestly, I was so scared I wouldn't even sit at my desk. My desk had been Bill Hanna's desk. He didn't want it anymore. He was in a small office on the third floor of the studio. This desk was big enough it could sleep a family of four. It was so big. And it intimidated me so much that for the first 6 months I was at the studio, I just sat on the couch and tried to figure out, okay, how do you make cartoons?
Mm. Yeah, this is a very interesting story at um because Hanna-Barbera, it was pretty much one of the biggest names in animation. I
Absolutely.
bet going as far back as like even the days of Tom and Jerry,
Yeah.
and way before they even started their own studio. So it's like wow, having to take over, having to fill in the shoes of uh, Bill Hanna, that must have been like, because like you said, you were very scared and you just had no idea what you were getting into. Having to fill in the shoes of one of the animation giants from that time
Well, look,
period.
I was a huge fan. I had never met Joe Barbera or Bill Hanna before, but I was 7 when they launched the Huckleberry Hound show, their first full
Mhm.
half-hour show. I was 9 when the Flintstones came on television, and I was a complete Flintstones fanatic. I love
Yeah,
Quick Draw McGraw, Yogi Bear, the Jetsons.
that is my
So
parents' generation. Yeah.
exactly. I was in complete awe when I walked in that door, and meeting those two guys, like having a chance. They were still at the studio every day. They were consultants to the studio. Officially, they worked for me, but I never acted like they worked for me. Like that would have been presumptuous on my part. And I would just soak up every bit of knowledge and thinking that I could from the two of them, and then from the other 200 or 300 people that worked at the studio. And little by little, I started feeling good about what was possible. Working for Ted Turner was amazing because he's one of the true geniuses of the modern media era. And he gave me a lot of latitude to screw up. And believe me, I did a lot of screw ups along the way, but it ended up working out pretty well for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you're gonna run a successful business, there's gonna be times where you're gonna fall and make mistakes and fail. I mean, that is a part of life, and it's natural. Everybody, you know, yeah, including me.
Exactly.
So, yeah, like we all like it's a part of like we get back up and we learn from our mistakes and see what we can do better for next
Absolutely.
time. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's been um, this huge renaissance, like I said, with animation. Like there's Netflix streaming, Hulu, YouTube, whatever is that you can find. And it's like I said, it's people that have mainly grew up with the shows that came from the 90s because we've had shows like Dexter's Laboratory, Johnny Bravo, Powerpuff Girls, Cow and Chicken, Courage the Cowardly Dog, and
Yeah.
so many other shows that we grew up with.
We had a great run. We had a
Yeah,
great run.
I'm just like right now I'm rewatching stuff like Kiss Next Door and Billy and Mandy and all of these great shows that originally started at Hanna-Barbera and that we would watch on Cartoon Network, and we really owe it to a lot of these. I mean, the creators themselves have really poured a lot of their hearts and souls into all of these shows because like I know that before the 90s, we've had shows like, I mean, not that I dislike any of them, but most of the shows that we've had in the 80s were kind of mostly more for like, okay, let's merchandise, sell toys and figures
Yeah,
and whatnot.
they were
Uh,
pretty junky. They were pretty
yeah,
junky.
yeah. I mean, not to say that, like, I mean, it kind of worked. I mean, I understood their marketing campaign, but it's like creator-driven shows. Like, I know that if we didn't have shows like what was going on with Nicktoons, like Ren and Stimpy, Rugrats, Doug, and various shows that have come out afterwards, we literally would not have had the Cartoon Network. Now, Cartoon Network started off with the classics, and then we've had some original shows, and it really did pay off handsomely. So I have a feeling that if we didn't have the shows that we grew up with, we still wouldn't be able to have the Cartoon Network that it is today. And a large part of that is, of course,
Yeah,
you
it was
and
a
countless filmmakers that have contributed to the success of the network and cable TV in
I
general.
was I I was just lucky to meet all those filmmakers and to be
Yeah,
in a position to be able to help out.
yeah. Because there's so many names that I could just say here, but for the sake of it, I think to all of you guys out there, thank you so much for the last 30 years. And with this being Cartoon Network's 30th anniversary, now it's a better time than ever. As a little bit of my tribute to, one of the my childhood channels. So yeah, happy 30th, Cartoon Network.
too bad that they're going through some rough times right
Oh
now, but
yeah, yeah.
hopefully it'll all get cleaned up.
Yeah, I'm not really I haven't really looked too much into it because it's kind of like a lot of
Don't.
like
It'll
changes
just
and
depress you.
yeah.
It'll just
I
depress you.
yeah, I mean there's like YouTube channels that are talking about the state of I'm just not really the person that just delves into like the depressing stuff because I just want to like focus on the impact and the influence that the channels have brought, the joy that it gave to millions out there, and don't really look at like, the behind the scenes stuff, which
That's the way to do it. You're
yeah.
doing the right thing.
Yeah, at least for my podcast, like I know there's other podcasts that delve into this, but that's not me.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, yeah. So, after the success of Cartoon Network, so I know that you've been serving as the president for many years. I want to say since like early 90s, and I think you're still doing some stuff with Cartoon Network. I mean, like even up to the 2010s. I mean, I know that you've created like a total of 250 short cartoons at Hanna-Barbera and your own studio, Frederator, and they've continued on as series like we've got Adventure Time, being Puppycat and other ones, Cartoon Network. I mean, I mentioned Netflix earlier, so
Sure.
um, and
Let me interrupt you for a quick second and just remind you and our audience. I didn't create anything. I
okay, yeah,
produced I produced all those cartoons, but it's really people like Penn Ward and Butch Hartman and Craig
oh yeah,
McCracken and Gendy Tartakovsky. They're the creators. I just tried to help them out.
yeah. Um, it's kind of like, how can I put this? It's kind of like when you go back to the old Warner Brothers shorts, you have Chuck Jones, Bob Clampett, Tex Avery, Friz Freleng, and people think that Leon Schlesinger was the creator. He was the producer. It was those guys, with the collaboration of the writers, story crew, the storyman, and
Completely.
countless others,
Exactly.
that really helped create these iconic characters. In fact,
Exactly.
um, I think it was. I know that a lot of those guys, like you said, like Butch, Gendy, Craig, they were also huge cartoon. They were just all nerds, not just in cartoons,
That's
but
an
like
understatement.
anime.
That's an
Um,
understatement.
yeah,
Absolutely.
there's a lot of influences, like with Samurai Jack, with it being more like having a more Eastern mythology anime influence into it. With Gendy's work. And it was really due to the Warner Brothers and the Hanna-Barbera stuff that really just sparked their love of animation. They shared their weird creativity with us, and I wouldn't even be here today if it wasn't for all of these wonderful gentlemen that really
Get,
shaped a lot of our childhoods.
and Gendy would tell you that he actually learned how to speak English because his family
Hmm.
were immigrants from Russia. He
Yeah,
learned to speak English by watching cartoons, which is the thing that really seeded his love in the medium.
yeah. So you just never know how much of an impact animation can really leave on you.
You bet. You bet.
Yeah. So with the internet and video, because going back to MTV, there was the MTV networks online, and there's now I know with the internet, um, because jumping from television to the internet and video, jumping from one area of showbiz to another, has it always been something that just because I know jumping into Hanna-Barbera was like a bit of a daunting task at first, but with internet and video, was it like a medium that you were familiar with prior to, because you've had years of experience doing radio, jumping to television, and now
Yep.
internet and video. Like, how did
It,
that
it,
transition flow for you?
it was the opposite of being familiar. About the only thing I knew about the internet is I could send emails and order books from Amazon. But by a series of happy accidents, the CEO of MTV Networks thought maybe I'd be a good guy to run the MTV online business, which was MTV.com, Nick.com, ComedyCentral.com, VH1, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know what I was thinking. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but I had no idea what I was doing. And I moved my family from Los Angeles back to New York and started running the company. And within a day, I realized I'd made a horrible mistake. Because in those days, in the late 90s, the infrastructure of the internet was still being built. And it was driven by the kind of people that I actually had no idea how to interact with, engineering kind of people. Over the years, I started realizing the engineers, the good engineers, were a lot like the good animation creators. But at the time, I was just confused. And, I have three things that are really important to me about being in business. And the number one thing is I want to have some fun. And I very quickly realized running the MTV online business that I was not having fun because I was the wrong guy in the wrong job at the wrong time. But a great thing happened to me there, which is I hired one person, a 25-year-old engineer out of AOL, which at the time was the big kahuna on the block, a guy called Emil Rensing. And the day I decided to quit, I went to tell Emil that I was quitting. And he said, gee, funny thing, I quit this morning. And just on the spur of the moment, I looked at him. I was 50 years old. And I looked at this 25-year-old who was really familiar with the medium. I said, hey, you want to figure out how to make TV shows, and I want to figure out more about this internet thing. Why don't we become partners? So while I still was making The Fairly Odd Parents, I think we had started Chalk Zone at that point.
Yeah.
Emil and I set up an office in New York, and I started learning from him about the internet like I was in the first grade. And he started learning very similar things about making television. And one thing led to another. And about 5 years later, I asked one of our interns who was 17 to help me build a site where I could put up animated shorts onto the internet. He didn't really like the idea that I had. It was based on somebody else's idea, and he told me it was really old school. And he came up with a better idea. He said, soon there's going to be video on the iPods. I was like, what? They're going to fit video? And I mean, I couldn't figure out like how any of this stuff worked. And he started building out a site for us where we could put animated videos on portable machines like that. And the day we launched Channel Frederator, this young guy was the guy who came up with the name. He built the website. He created all the engineering for it. The day we announced Channel Frederator, a year early, Apple announced the first video iPod. And all of a sudden, we were one of the few quality places on the iPod. Every time there was an Apple event, Steve Jobs would have our logo like up on the screen behind him. And in the first month, we had 1 million downloads of these short cartoons that we were putting up. And from there, Emil and I decided to start a new video company on the internet called Next New Networks, making YouTube our primary distribution business. And we just started launching dozens of new internet channels about cars, about weddings, about indie filmmaking, about parody, music parodies. And before long, 5 years later, Google and YouTube bought our company so that they could figure out what we knew. And I had started Channel Frederator, and I had a great run building out cartoons on the internet and again, helping independent filmmakers get their stuff out into the world.
Yeah. So it always goes back to your philosophy of creators first, always original and producing your next favorite cartoon.
Exactly. I always believe in the next thing.
Yeah, same here. Um, so it's nice that with your different experiences of doing radio, TV, and now like internet and videos and whatnot, it also paid off with like because there was the Bravest Warriors that Pendleton Ward created, and which
Yep.
received like millions of views, and it um you've also signed with Simon's Cat, and you've done a lot of work with them. So and there's also the Liam Puppy Cat short, and also the Netflix series Castlevania, which is really picking up steam.
You
It just
bet.
shows that with indie, this is something that I've talked about in previous episodes of the podcast, but I really do believe that indie animation is really has been exploding. Why? Because there's like a lot of indie creators that are starting online and getting their projects made, and it's been really starting to become like the next big thing. Now, not that like cable TV is they're still making a lot of good stuff, but with indie animation, it's like there's really no better time to be a fan and just start making your own projects, like specifically for the
Absolutely.
internet, than it is with the indie. Like particularly in the 2010s and especially 2020s, because like
Yeah.
after COVID hit, then it's like a lot of these projects and animations, some of which that I was actually even a part of, have just been getting like a lot of, attention, and some of them have even signed on to networks, such as the case with Haspin Hotel, Hell of a Pop, with Vivsy Pop, and a lot of other creators that are out there. As far as I know, I think even Odd One is out, got a TV show on Netflix, if I'm not mistaken. So
And
yeah, it's pretty good.
Dead India, which was something we did for Cartoon Hangover,
Oh yeah. Mhm.
was originally a short and now a great series over at Netflix. Look, like I said, this is a period of time like no other time in history. Where when I left Frederator, I think Channel Frederator Network had 3,000 animation channels on it, and that was just a drop in the bucket with the amount of original animation channels there are out there in the world.
Yeah. Um, so and it's still going strong even to this very day. Like
It's going to get
who knows?
stronger
Yeah.
and stronger and stronger and stronger. This is never going to stop. The generation of young animators that's coming up behind you, they've never known any different world, and they're going to be just doing this stuff like it's second nature.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, because especially since there's going to be a lot of creators out there that are going to be getting their start in the industry, even with, especially right now, because it's like an evolution where what started as like it was pretty much like a risky decision to just start making like creator driven cartoons, but now it's like we've been getting a lot more like representation in cartoons. We've been getting
For
more
sure.
shows that are focusing on like the struggles of identity and a lot of different mature issues that we've been getting into mainstream, like more in indie stuff that we've been getting into mainstream. I mean, mainstream is starting to go into this direction too, don't get me wrong. And it's like, who
Yeah,
knows
but
where it's gonna go from? Yeah.
mainstream is affected by all of these independent animators.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And I guess the thing to just really say at this point is there's nowhere else to go but up from this point forward. Who knows where it's going to continue to grow and how it's going to continue to evolve? Just have to see what happens in the foreseeable future.
It's an exciting time. Absolutely. It's really the most exciting time.
Of course. So with the future, because I know that with everything that you're doing, because you're now have another company called Fred Films, and you're producing a lot of productions that are in the works that are under NDA. I guess what I wanted to leave this conversation with is where do you see yourself like as a human being and just your business and just everything going forward? Where do you see it all moving forward in the future, in your honest
Well,
opinion?
I've told you before, I consider myself a lucky guy, but maybe one of the luckiest things is I have no plans to retire because there are so many great creative people out there to meet. And it keeps me going every day. It keeps me excited about the idea that any day tomorrow will happen and a new creative person will show up in my life that maybe I can be helpful to. So at the moment, I'm just focused on new animated films. We will see what happens. I'm happy to be doing that. And hopefully, the world, it's a little chaotic at the moment, but hopefully, if we do it right, we will figure out a way to create cartoons for the next generation.
Right on. So, anything that you want to share or talk about that is currently out that we can check out and we can,
Well, I think the best
indulge
thing
in?
to check out is the new season of Being Puppy Cat on Netflix. As you know, Robert, we started Being Puppy Cat as a short on Cartoon Hangover. It did fantastically. We didn't have any money to make a series, and we didn't want to bring it to any of the networks because we didn't think anyone else would understand it. So we went to Kickstarter, and our Kickstarter community showed up with almost $900,000, allowed us to make a first season, which was great. We started going into business with Verve, VRV, and they helped us make a second season before they decided that they needed to sell their company because they couldn't keep going. So we sold it to Netflix. It just went on at the beginning of September, has done phenomenally. And if your audience hasn't seen it, I recommend it right away. It's really one of the most interesting, exciting cartoons created by Natasha Allegri. She's a former Adventure Time artist who is the person responsible for creating Fiona and Cake over at Adventure Time. And as you probably know, there's a new Fiona and Cake series coming next year from HBO Max. Yeah. So there's a lot of interesting things going out there in the world. The Fairly Odd Parents is being rebooted as a CG series that's going to be on Netflix. There are a lot of really interesting things that are out there that I'm really proud to be associated with. And my friend Kevin Coldy, who was the showrunner and force behind Castlevania, is making a brand new Castlevania series. I'm not involved with it, but we're still great friends, and I'm wishing him all the luck in the world. And soon enough, he and I are going to launch a little podcast series that I won't tell you any more about until it launches.
Well, that's pretty exciting. Yeah.
It's
Um,
all exciting.
yeah. So I also wanted to ask you, what are some of your favorite like shows or just anything that you've ever worked on? What are some of your favorites that
Well,
you've
you
ever
know, in
done?
terms of the shows I've worked on, I really look at them all like my kids, you know, and I don't have favorites. I have ones that I really like. I like them all. All the creators, I think, are just really wonderful people. And so I think it would be wrong for me to say I like this one more than that one. You know, as a lot of people know, Castlevania isn't right in my wheelhouse. It's not the kind of thing that I generally watch. In fact, honestly, I don't watch too much comedy anymore. I watch a lot of crime and mystery because that's
Oh,
what I like
nice.
to watch on television. In fact, I'm trying to get a mystery animated series going. We'll see what happens. I haven't figured that out yet. Um, but from my standpoint, I'm just a really happy guy to be involved with creative people of any kind.
Yeah, it's like when you choose a show or like when you talk about someone and it's like, oh man, there's this feeling of like, oh, did I leave somebody or something out? And it's like, yeah, I feel yeah. But
You
it,
just froze on me. Yeah.
oh, sorry, yeah, it's just kind of like, yeah, it's like you just want to say, just say everyone and everything. So yeah. Um, so what about? I know you mentioned some of the Hanna-Barbera stuff that you've seen as a kid, like Huckleberry Hound and whatnot. Any shows like cartoons or just anything that you're watching now that you also really enjoy and you've enjoyed when you were a wee little lad and whatnot?
Well, when I was a kid, my three favorites were Huckleberry Hound, Bugs Bunny, and
Yeah.
the Flintstones. But I liked all the other stuff that everybody liked. You know, luckily for me, when I was a kid, I we were the first television generation, and there until I was 7, nobody was making cartoons for television. So they were just taking all the great old theatricals, Mickey Mouse, Tom and Jerry, Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, um, you name it. They were all transferred to television. And that was my education in cartoons. Even going back, if I got up really early in the morning, the only cartoons they were running were old silent Farmer Gray cartoons and Felix the Cat cartoons. So I got educated by the very, very best stuff. But my three faves, like I said, Huckleberry Hound, that also included Pixie and Dixie and the Yogi Bear Show, Quick Draw McGraw. I liked all the Hanna-Barbera stuff. I was a huge fan. That's actually, to be honest with you, it's why I was interested in going to work at Hanna-Barbera, even though they hadn't made anything that I liked in several years. I was so enamored with the stuff that I grew up with that I thought working there would be the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah. And you mentioned that were watching a lot of crime and mystery stuff, and yeah, that's very, very interesting.
Yep.
So do you have a list of shows that you're watching now?
Well, my favorite show of the last few years has been Bosch on Amazon Prime,
Mhm.
based on a series of books by an author called Michael Connolly, who is involved. He's one of the writers and executive producers of the series. It's great. I just watched a fabulous mini series on BritBox called Sherwood. It was fantastic. Um, there's an Australian show that I just watched the third season on called Mystery Road, about a section of Australia that is um, populated by the people of color and the way that they are treated badly in the Australian society and how they live and the mysteries that come out of that. I could go on forever, but those are the ones I've been watching lately.
Right. Yeah. So, what is something about yourself that not a lot of people know about? Like, you've worked with a bunch of people in showbiz, but what is something that not too many people know about you? Just as a fun fact.
I started out making records, as I told you, and I was really into avant garde jazz, which to most people just sounds like noise. And I was so involved in it that I recorded dozens of artists. And one of them was probably the most famous avant garde pianist of the last 50, 75 years, named Cecil Taylor. I recorded a concert with him in 1973. And this year, I released that concert on my label that I revived just to be able to do it. It was called Cecil Taylor, The Return Concert. It's on all of your favorite streaming services, Amazon, Apple, Spotify, whatever, Deezer, whatever it is that you listen to. And it was probably one of the most exciting projects I've done in the last 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a fun fact. Yeah, I just usually ask this because like I like to get to know people outside of, the biz
Absolutely.
and just what their interests are, special because part of my podcast is like we talk about games and movies and just pop culture in general, so it's just always fun to indulge in this with
Well,
whatever
the
hobbies and
biggest the
yeah.
biggest thing that's important, and we'll have to go on this front because I do have to go in a couple of minutes,
Same here.
is everybody in my family are scientists. And I thought I was going to be a scientist too. I knew at 6 that I was going to be a scientist. I ignored English class. I ignored everything in school except for science and math. And even my older son is a physicist. But the thing that changed my life was falling in love with the Beatles. I'm still a complete Beatles fanatic.
Oh
And
yeah. Yeah.
and they are the reason that I changed my life. I went to college to study chemistry, and 6 weeks in, I realized I liked the Beatles more than science, and that was the end of that.
Yeah.
So you never know in life what's going to change.
Definitely. So, do you have like any last piece of advice, anything that you want to close us out on, any last bit of wisdom that you like to bestow upon a young group of artists and creators, entrepreneurs out there who want to give this whole wild, crazy industry a shot? Any last words that you want to say?
Absolutely. If you're a maker, keep making things. Even when it looks dark and you can't figure out what to do with those things, just keep making things because the more things you make, the better they're going to be, and the closer you're going to get to making the thing you want to make. If you're a fan, just watch all that stuff that's being made, whether it's on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok or wherever it is that you
Oh yeah.
go. Be a fan and write a note to all those people encouraging them. So, one way or the other, as a maker or as a fan, we each have a role in this stuff. And if we keep each other happy, if we keep supporting each other, great things are going to come out.
Yeah, the same can apply if you're starting up a business, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I've failed at many more businesses than I've succeeded at. But
Right.
the only, there's a dating expert out there that when people complain that they can't get a good date or the dates never work out, he said, every failed date is closer to the date that works. And it's the same thing with businesses. I told you I started a record company. I went bankrupt in that record company, but it was one of the most exciting times of my life. And it was a great building block for the next things that I did for the rest of my life.
Right. Yeah, so this has been a really great conversation. Thank you so much for joining today. If you'd like to plug your stuff, like company, website, social media, and whatnot, that would be very much appreciated.
All
People
my
can
social
check you.
media is at Fred Seibert, Seibert. My company website is fredfilms.com. And thank you for being fans. And thank you, Robert, for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, any last farewells or goodbyes that you want to also close out on, or just anything? Any
Only a really thankful goodbye to you, Robert. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this has been this episode of Station Square. This interview will be posted. It's going to be up sometime over the weekend, so stay tuned on my social media. I'm at Mystic Guy or J everywhere, so it should be pretty easy to find me. Regardless, though, thank you so much, and stick around next time for more episodes. And yeah, until then, have a lovely rest of your weekend. Take care, stay safe out there, and keep on creating. This is Robert Jackson, signing out, and until then, have a lovely rest of your days ahead of you. And happy Halloween!